Hey everybody, I've been accumulating some questions over the past month or so on YouTube that I've been meaning to get to, and I thought this would be a good time to do that. First question from Don Moore wants to know about the catwalks that I'm making and how do I attach those to the wall? Are they going into the studs or what? And this is basically the way I attach almost everything to a wall is I first try to find a stud. So I'll drill a hole and see if it feels a stud in there. If I do, great. Then I'll just use a long screw to attach that bracket or whatever in there. And then if I don't feel the stud, then I can pull it out. I'll have a hole there. I'll know where to put an anchor. So in a lot of cases, such as those cat platforms, the walkways, I used a combination. You know, I got lucky and hit the stud on one side and then had to drill an anchor in the other side. And yeah, of course I could use like a stud finder or something, but when I want those positioned, you know, exactly where I want them, it doesn't really matter, you know, if there's a stud there or not. I need to drill the hole in that particular spot. JD says he's got a newbie question, but what are the pros and cons of using a dado blade on a table saw versus a router table? That's a great question. I actually find making dados and rabbets a lot easier on a table saw using dado blades. Using a router bit means that you're almost always going to have to make a couple of passes because you can't fine tune the adjustment, the size of that router bit. 3/4 inch lumber is rarely exactly 3/4 inch, especially plywood. And if it's solid lumber, you might have sanded it down and it's probably not going to be exact. So if you use a 3/4 inch straight bit in your router, it's probably going to fit too loose. To make rabbets on a router table is probably just as easy as on the table saw because you're still going to need a fence that you can move backward to increase the size of that rabbet over several passes. Another consideration is that when using a router, especially a lower powered one and one that takes 1/4 inch shank bits, that there's not a lot of material that can be removed at once. And so if you're making a dado or a groove or a rabbet, you'll probably need to start with a little bit and then just keep cutting more off. If you try to cut that entire thing out at once, it might bog it down and you might not get a good cut. As far as safety goes, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between the table saw and the router table. I think to me, the router table is a little bit more intimidating, and you also have to have more control. Well, you have to have control over your workpiece on both machines, but it seems like on a router table, it's easier for that spinning bit to grab the wood and shoot it backward. But of course, you're not going to be standing in line with that when you're making your cut. So I don't know, either way. Personally, I don't see where a stack of dado blades is any more dangerous than a regular table saw blade. In some ways, it might be a little bit safer because there's less risk of kickback because you're not cutting all the way through the boards. Animation Creations 42 reminded me that in the UK, a dado is also called a housing. I kind of like that. It's like a little house that holds another board. Tyler and a few other people lately have been asking me what my opinion is on the pandemic and the lockdown, especially here in California. And I just don't think that this channel is a place for that. This isn't Twitter. I think everybody is angry, depressed, frustrated, all of these things, and we all tend to think that it's just us. We think that, gosh, everything is conspiring against me, when in fact everybody is experiencing these exact same emotions. So you're not alone. I mean, sure, there's nothing I would rather do than be able to go to a movie theater again, or go out to eat at a restaurant inside, or especially to go to the gym, but I don't see any of that stuff happening anytime soon, at least here. We're still in full shelter-in-place lockdown mode here, and I never thought it would be this many days, but here we are. The other thing I always try to tell myself that I've learned over the years is don't lose sleep over things that are beyond your control. It's just not worth worrying about those things. A few people pointed out that when Antonio was making his saw cuts, that his blade was way too high, that he should lower it. And I know that is conventional wisdom, says that your blade should just be slightly above the thickness of the wood, and I usually do that. I mean, I'm not, you know, militant about it. I usually try to get it pretty close to that. but I also don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think it's going to affect your cut any if your blade is up high. And there's certain cuts that you do want to have your blade way up high if you just don't want that curve of the saw blade to be so dramatic. I guess lowering your blade does reduce the potential of injury a little bit. Maybe it's less likely for you to skim your hand across it or something like that. Here's a guy who called me a bozo twice in one paragraph. I wouldn't listen to what this bozo has to say. Wouter Ellis asks, when I use the push stick, my board seems to slightly run away from the fence. How can I fix this? That's a good question, because you should be using 2 push sticks. Never use a single push stick on the table saw. One stick should be pressing the board downward and forward, and then the other stick should be pressing the board against the fence. Or you could just get a gripper from Microjig. It presses in all 3 directions. Razi Don asks what kind of clamps I use to hold that sacrificial fence in place on my rip fence. As far as I know, those clamps are specifically made for that one task. They're pretty handy. You just drill a few holes on the edge of a board and then you don't have to worry about your clamps interfering with your workpiece. I'm gonna see if I can find a link for those. I'll include those down in the description if you're interested. Somebody had an interesting comment about my movie rating system and how I said that when I rate movies on a scale of 1 to 10, 6 is the lowest I go, because I think every film has merit, even no matter how bad you think it is. A lot of people worked on it. There was a lot of people who believed in it and really tried to get this thing to work. So I come at it with like a grade level system where 60%, 60 to 70 would be a D, you know? And so most of the films I rate fall into that 7 category, which would be a C, average, and I mostly forget about it. He says, so everybody gets a participation trophy. Sigh. He writes sigh in there. Okay, I know there's this whole thing against participation trophies, that it waters everything down and that nobody is special if everybody gets a trophy, but I don't look at it that way. I look at having participation trophies tells people that you did something that probably other people aren't doing. Having a participation trophy or an award doesn't take away the other awards, like for first place, second place, or whatever. It doesn't diminish those in the least. It just says that you've done this thing that not a lot of people do. When I ran those marathons, everybody who completed a marathon gets a medal, and they're all participation awards. I admit that, but I'm also very proud of that because it says that I completed this thing. This is something I did. And to get it back to movies, I think it's the exact same thing. Nobody sets out to make a movie that you just hate. There's a small but dedicated group of people who like it when I talk about movies. And since we're already in September, I thought I'd give you my list of the best films of this year so far. I'm gonna get real fast right through this. Some of these may have technically come out in 2019, but they kind of had a mass release this year, especially on streaming. Color Out of Space, Host, Short History of the Long Road, Velocipaster, The Vast of Night, Becky, Swallow, VFW, Horse Girl, The Lodge, Bliss, and Gretel and Hansel. Some of those are pretty polarizing movies. If you've seen any of these movies, tell me if you liked them, or if you absolutely hated them and I'm just totally wrong. Hey, I thought I would share some of the mail that's come through recently. I got these 2 postcards from Thomas in Germany, and really nice notes he wrote me on the back of these. This one is a colorful beach picture. He says that they want to get down to the beach pretty soon because they haven't been to the beach in a while, and he's going to make one of these types of beach chairs. I think that was really cool. And then he sent me this one here that says, Das Leben ist bunt, which means life is colorful. He also mentioned here that because of my videos, he's learning a little bit more about the US measuring system. It's good to know both, right? US and metric. Okay, I also got a package from Dustin, who is the koozie guy. Do you know what a koozie is? I only learned what a koozie was a couple of years ago. And it's these cup holder things, you know, you put and keeps them cold. So he said he's been getting into screen printing, and right now he's just making these koozies. So that's the koozie guy's logo. But the funny part is he sent me this one, Dave Matthews Band, and he said that a buddy of him told him to make them because they'd sell quick. Big mistake. He said he can't get rid of them. The best part about this whole thing was his little package he made for me, Freddy Krueger. It says, stay woke, which is always good advice when you're dealing with Freddy Krueger. And finally, this is amazing. This is a laser cut from Zach Lee. It's just beautiful how he cut out these letters, and look at the joints in the frame. Beautiful looking artwork. I'm gonna put it right up here on the wall. And just a quick reminder before I go, if you are looking for a program to start you in woodworking from the ground up, no experience necessary, I'd like for you to consider the Weekend Woodworker. That's my series of courses to get you up and running this weekend. You don't need any experience, you don't need a lot of space, and you don't need a lot of money. I can show you how you can get all of the tools that you're gonna need to get started for under $1,000. Head over to mytoollist.com to download my free guide. It's a no-nonsense approach to woodworking. I've been saying that sometimes, a no-nonsense approach. Like all the other woodworking approaches are just the nonsense approaches. This channel is the nonsense approach to woodworking.